Hello and welcome to the Purpose Cycle podcast, the podcast that gives you impactful practices to build towards fruition and fulfillment. Here's a taste of what we've got in store for you today.
But I'd always dream of being a professional footballer, and that dream of walking out at Wembley or playing for your country, that was my main goal from an early age. That's all I ever wanted to do. For me to wear that tracksuit and go back to my mates, I thought I was a hero. And obviously I just lost my whole the way I got there, all the hard work, and I literally thought I made it, but I didn't. But that is the worst stage of life for any sportsman, being told you are not good enough.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the Purpose Cycle podcast. Things sound a little bit different this week because we are recording at a social distance rather than over a video call, and my guest today is not only a close friend of mine but somebody who truly has an inspiring story to tell. From the highs of junior football, suffering the heartbreaking news of being released from professional football, my guest shows resilience, bounce back ability amongst many other traits to come back from his disappointment to walking out as a Wembley winner. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Nicholson. How are you doing, Tom?
Hi, not too bad. Excited to tell people my story.
Brilliant, yeah, it's great to have you on. Could you just give the listeners just a quick rundown of your career and your sort of personality as well?
Yeah, so basically from a young age, I've always been into sport and activities like that. At the beginning I started with rugby league, spent about 5 years playing rugby league, and then from the age of probably about 14 got myself into playing football, and then from 14 got signed by Hull City, and then my journey from Hull City took me to England, and then from England took me to America, and then from America took me back into the local scene in Hull, and then playing semi-professional football. And then resulting in pretty much playing semi-professional for the past 10 to 12 years and going from there, really.
Nice. We're going to sort of talk about the Purpose Cycle. It's relatively new to you because obviously it's a concept that I've spoke a little bit about, but what's probably going to be the main focus is the long-term cycle, so the full career, but inside that there's probably lots of mini cycles of levelling up and changes and adaptations you've had to make. So we're first going to talk about the aspiration phase, which is the initial spark of wanting to start a new journey. So going into, you said you played rugby league. How did the football journey then start for you? What was the different factors that got you into playing football?
So it's a funny story, really. So I played rugby league. Rovers, Hull FC were interested at the time, and basically played a cup final, the Yorkshire Cup final, and the game was quite tasty. Anyway, there was a fight that broke out. My father wasn't happy with it. Said that'll be the last time you play, son. So I took a backward step from rugby league, and basically I was playing on the street corner with a couple of friends, and a football team walked past, literally a man with 12 children, and said, "Oh, do you want to come to our football team?" So I was like, "Yeah, go on then, I'll take a shout at that." Anyway, we went around the corner to a big primary school and played football, and then basically from there I played a couple of times, and then Hull City were there, and then for me, I just wanted to get back into playing football, especially some sort of ball skill game, and football was the one. And for me, I always watched, I'm a Leeds United fan, so I had people like Gary Speed that I really were my aspirations to be an outfield player. However, because I was a big boy, they put me in goal. So the next person that I looked up at was a guy called Peter Schmeichel, who was obviously at Manchester United, but obviously the Leeds and Man United thing, I shouldn't be really looking at Peter Schmeichel, but loved his character, loved the way that he was a big presence. I was a big boy obviously at primary school, and that's the way I got into it, really. I wanted to be kind of like the next Peter Schmeichel, really.
You say you wanted to be like Peter Schmeichel and there's other role models. At that point, was there any aspirations of thinking, right, I'd like to play in the Premier League, or was it just to go out and enjoy it after you ended up leaving rugby over the values of what your father was saying? Was it more about enjoyment for you at the time, or was it more about making a living and making a career out of it?
At the young age, so it was about 13 years old, at the first point of it was about enjoyment, but that was when I was with my friends on the street corner. But then I used to always do this thing on a night time where my father would come upstairs, give me a kiss on the cheek, say night, but I'd always dream of like being a professional footballer, and that dream of like walking out at Wembley or playing for your country, that was my main goal from an early age. That's all I ever wanted to do. Now that didn't mean I wanted to be a goalkeeper, that didn't mean I wanted to be a football player. It was just my main aim in life. I don't know how I was going to do it, if it was going to be rugby, football, even croquet, anything that could get me to that Wembley stadium where I'd walk out with the 3 lines on my shirt or with my club and to walk out of the Wembley pitch.
Amazing. So really then that's a big part of the aspiration phase, the visualisation, manifestation of goals, actually dreaming it, seeing it, believing it. So did you understand what that was at the time? Did you understand visualisation, or was it just something that you were just more in hope, or was it something that you purposely did because you knew that the more you thought about it, the more it would come to fruition?
Back obviously when I was younger, we're talking 20 years ago, like what you've just said there, visualisation, probably didn't realise what that meant at the time, and to be honest, probably didn't know what that meant 10 years ago really. Yeah. It's not something that would come in my vocabulary that I would look at visualisation things. But if we take a backward step and you look on a night time where I'm dreaming of Wembley, and every time I play football I dreamt of being that specific individual, then yeah, I was visualising of my next step and how I would get into the professional game and looking for Wembley. So yeah, I probably did visualise all the time what I wanted to be.
Something that's probably more common now with the likes of sports psychologists in the game, but obviously they've now put a label on it as well. So then you move on to the next step of the purpose cycle, which is realisation, and I break this down into 4 different strands. So, and this is probably one of the longest chapters of the purpose cycle because it's got such depth to it, and it's probably a continuous one as well. So the first one is a task orientated realisation. So this is the realisation that a task, from playing on the street corner to then going to the professional game is completely different levels, and having to maybe adapt or learn something pretty specific for the task at hand. Was there any problems with that? Because obviously you've said you've transitioned from rugby to football. It seems like the task oriented side was quite an easy one for yourself because you could always perform that skill anyway, or was there something that you had to go and really work on if you were going to make it?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously rugby and football is very different, the contact side and things like that. However, being a goalkeeper, there's some similarities of obviously catching and agility and things like that. But yeah, from my dad's point of view, he said if you want to take it serious, you've got to take it serious. So things like adding different things. Obviously, I'd go to school Monday to Friday like every other child does, but on a night time, making sure you do extra little things, because some children, like now for instance, they want to be professional footballers, but you've got to put the hours in. So for me, I would have an individual that lived near me. Is a great guy called Brian Jarvis. And basically I would train with him on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night and a Saturday morning and a Sunday morning, and we'd do goalkeeper drills, we'd be firing balls at me, and it was just repetition after repetition after repetition. And for me to take that next step, and no matter what anyone said to me, if I was playing Sunday League and someone said, oh, the goalkeeper's not great, that would just fire me up more to train and train and train and train.
Yeah, obviously this being the second episode of the Purpose Cycle podcast, listeners will not have yet heard, but in future episodes people talk about putting the reps in, more specifically Josh Beat, who's a personal trainer, talks about constantly putting the reps in over a long period of time. So that consistency resonates with that quite a lot. Were there any points then where you had almost like the lack of motivation? I'm not a big fan of motivation because it can dwindle quite easily, so you had to really show discipline, or was it more so from your father's side of saying you are going to this and you're grateful afterwards?
I think with the motivation side of things, I listened to a podcast last night, to be honest, about motivation, and motivation is a bit of a strange word because if you enjoy something so much, you shouldn't have to be motivated into doing that. So for instance yourself, I know you'll be quite modest when I say this to you and you won't take it, but you are a great teacher. So for me, you don't need to be motivated in the morning to come to work because you enjoy that. Similar to football, I shouldn't be motivated to wanting to do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday sessions, because I know my end goal is I want to be a professional football player. Your end goal, for instance, is probably to be the best possible teacher you can to be and get on that ladder and progress and progress and progress. So motivation for me is a bit, when I hear people that they want to be motivated to do something, I'm like, do you want to be motivated in yourself, or are you motivated because your father wants to do it?
Yeah. So it's more about the identity of yourself, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So if you're identifying yourself as someone who's going to be a successful footballer, you have to make sure that you associate with that habit and actually put the reps in. Which is, that's more slowly what I'm gravitating towards more and more, because I always was under the impression of like motivational speakers, like you go and you listen to them and you're like, wow, let's go and do it, but then after 2 weeks you lose that thing because you're not internally identifying with that person. So I completely agree with you there. So then we relate that to the environmental realizations and situational realizations, and this basically is like, you know, family life, home life, and what obstacles you had to then combat to get through. Because a lot of people, when we talk about purpose cycles with maybe starting businesses, you're going to get, you know, people in the mid-40s who have a family are going to find it, you know, a lot more difficult to then just quit the 9 to 5 and start a business than somebody who's 18 who has no responsibility. But on top of that, there might have been situations growing up where you thought, this presents a challenge, especially then going to a professional football team where you've got to, you know, travel all over the country. So what challenges and obstacles did you face environmentally, especially talking like discussing the areas where you grew up?
So when I was growing up, I had a group of friends, love them to bits, and they've always been there for me, to be honest. There's maybe 4 or 5 of us, and basically we're from East Hull, and this isn't a dig at Hull, definitely not, but people from this area, or Yorkshire area, we are happy at basically staying with our group of friends and being the big fish in the small pond, and there's nothing wrong with that. I would never say there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you want to progress as a human being or progress in your chosen profession, I've been a strong believer that you need to travel, and that if that means travel the world, it means travel the world, or travel to around the country to play football. So the obstacles, really, coming back to your question, my obstacles were, I was a very home boy, loved my dad to bits and my mum, but my dad was like kind of my inspirational. When I was away from home, I missed my dad massively. And my friends, really, like I'd be in contact with my friends every night. I'd get off the school bus and I'd be with them from like 3:30 right up to like 8:30 till my dad called me in for tea and things. So for me, not listening to the peer pressures, staying out with my friends. I'm not saying that my friends were a bad influence in the sense of we'd be drinking and doing silly things like that. We'd literally just be playing football and just playing games and things like that. But because I was with them so much, we were a close-knit family, really, with my friends growing up. But if I wanted to achieve them goals that I've set out at an early age, I knew that I'd have to step away, really. And it is sad because I've probably not stayed in contact with them as best as I should have done. But if we look at what I've achieved in football and sport, then really it was probably a sacrifice that I needed to make, because at the end of the day, I'm happy with what I've achieved so far in the game of football.
Yeah, definitely, And we'll dig into that a little bit more when we talk about other people as your circle changes, as you progress through your career. Was there anything with, talk about the environment then, home, school, was there anything that you had to balance there? Because you talked about getting off the school bus and having to play football, so were your studies in any kind of way? Because I know it's quite a common theme amongst footballers, saying school maybe wasn't for them because they just wanted to be out practicing and playing all the time.
Yeah, I had a really good upbringing with my parents. At a young age, I think I was around 10 when obviously they split up and got a divorce. So that was difficult at the time, understanding that. Sleeping at my father's house 4 days a week and then my mum's 3. That was difficult to come to terms with, and long journeys in the car when both in the car, and bless them, they were arguing in the back and things like that. But I'm not daft enough to think that other children in the UK and in the world that have gone through the same. But for me, I needed to focus on what I wanted to do, and then again coming to the goal situation with friends, just making sure that I knew what I wanted. And obviously it was difficult growing up with my parents split up, and living so close to my friends and not trying to get into trouble. And especially I had a couple of teachers I went to a school called St Richard's on Preston Road in Ings Estate. It was just around there, and there was a couple of teachers there that looked out for me really. And then obviously I went to St Mary's, and there was a PE teacher there called Mark Harridge, and always had the best interests at heart, and he always had that policy where he had an open door and I could speak to him about anything. And I think for people to progress in sport especially, but even everyday life, I feel like you've always got to have that network of people that support you. Now for me, I had my father, I had my mum obviously, I had a couple of teachers growing up, but then I had the old guy I told you about, the goalkeeper coach, Brad Jarvis, always there for me. So I always had a good network of people to kind of rely on, not for like motivation to get me up for things, but just to bounce ideas off. Because I always think your friends are great for that, but some friends will always sometimes have their interests at heart, hence the reason why I had to move away from my friends so that I could progress in football and things like that.
Yeah, so surrounding yourself with key adults with experience is probably like the main theme of that, because yes, like you said, your friends can offer you good advice, but the advice will have some element of what I call sort of confirmation bias of what their beliefs and interests are, whereas your parents, your teachers, your coaches have lived long enough to bounce experience and ideas off each other and provide you with that, maybe some insight on what they've done before. Your dad was obviously involved in the game anyway. Did he play? What was his background with football?
Yeah, so on the rugby side of it, my dad played rugby union with his twin brother. They played for Marist, and very good players. That's why I was a little bit shocked when he said that he didn't really want me playing rugby. Yeah. Obviously the game's changed from the years that they played. It was more of a gentleman's sport. They played rugby union, and obviously I was more interested in rugby league. But yeah, my dad, he was in football. He was a referee actually, which is funny because no one really wants to be a referee, bless him. So yeah, he was a referee, but also with this football team, at first he wasn't keen, but he came to watch, and then the manager actually wanted him to become like the assistant manager. So my dad ended up like coaching us as well as being there every single session. So for me, I always had my dad there, and he wasn't really hard on me, but he would tell me where I think I should have done better and should have done this. And obviously with your father, he was a mentor to me. Like I always wanted to impress him, and he was always supportive in the sense of he would tell me where I was going wrong and what I should improve. And I tried not to like argue back with him, because I'm thinking if you can see that, then who am I to like question you, sort of thing. So I respected where he's been. Yeah,
love it. Quite open to feedback.
Yeah.
And then, so what I've got from, we're going to skip realisation of others because we've touched on that a little bit, but I want to touch on that a little bit more in a moment. But quite a lot of it's coming back to yourself all the time. So what can I learn off them, or I have to stay like driven, trying not to use the word motivation, but driven. I have to work hard. So it's all about, I see a bit of a theme of like earning your own responsibility, because you dictate the path that you go on, and if you were to not ever get that professional deal, then it would be your own fault. Is that the sort of mindset that you had?
I had that mindset, and to be honest, when I got the contract at Hull City, I lost my way in the sense of that I became arrogant, maybe, what we call in football big time. Started to like not really look at the fundamentals of like what got me there, and probably resulting in me maybe being released, and not really like doing what I should have done to get to progress to the next step, and that was on me. So for me, knowing what I did wrong, it hurt. So it was literally, and I know we'll speak about it in a minute, it was like rebuilding myself back up and not getting, it wasn't the glitz and glam, it wasn't like the Premier League or anything like that, but for a lad who's from East Hull and literally didn't really have much, and I went to St Richard's, which was on Preston Road and places like that, for me to wear that tracksuit and go back to my mates, they thought I was a hero. And obviously I just lost my whole, like the way I got there, all the hard work, and I literally thought I made it, but I didn't. And that was like, heartbreaking.
Quite a deep-rooted like self-realisation and of some of the characteristics and flaws that you had to sort of like acknowledge. And we'll talk about those now. Actually, what were the sort of things that you said about obviously like like overconfidence, arrogance, or big time as you referred to.
Yeah.
And what were the sort of things then did you lose your sense in terms of timekeeping, in terms of being prepared? Because I think preparation is one of those things. I think if someone does something quite a lot of time and think, I've got this correct now, I don't need to prepare. And that's one of the things that I always say, like, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail.
Yeah.
So what sort of key things were you maybe told about, or that you noticed that you didn't have when you signed, that you did have before you signed?
So like what you just said about timekeeping, so training in the holidays, for instance, or there was a couple of times that when I was at St Mary's, there'd be training in the daytime and I'd turn up late, or I wouldn't tell school that I wasn't going into school, or I'd maybe be truant, or I just wouldn't go to school because I'm just thinking, well, I don't need my GCSEs, like I'm done, I've made it, it's great. And like obviously Brad Jarvis, he really worked really hard on my footwork, and the realisation of the point was when I was training with a guy called Bose Mail, and basically it was at Boothry Park and we were doing ladders and things like that, and I turned up a little bit late and a bit of a joking with all the goalkeepers about it and stuff like that, and I remember doing the ladders and I was thinking, I feel real slow here, thinking to myself in my head like, why? And thinking, I must have not eaten right, or I must have done this or that. But looking at it, I was thinking, do you know what? I'm heavy here. And what I mean by heavy, I mean I'm overweight. And I'm thinking, well, how can I be overweight after like 6 months? And then when I got home that night, I spoke to my dad. And my dad was honest. He just went, well, yeah, look what you've been doing. You've been around with mates on the night time. You've been eating pizzas. You've started to eat Chinese, which, to be fair, my dad's quite old school. It was literally regimented teas. Monday, Tuesday, it was stew. Wednesday, Thursdays, chicken tonight. Friday was chip shop night. So literally, all that went out the window. And I was more bothered about seeing girls, doing this, doing that. But going back to what we were saying about what was the realisation? The realisation was when I was training with these pros, these lads that were on big money, because at this time I was on peanuts compared to them, and I wasn't keeping up, and realistically I should be overpassing them being a 16, 17-year-old boy, and I wasn't. So then I had to literally go back and strip everything away and start afresh.
Suit Up Apparel is a new menswear company who provide customers with a compelling range of products that combine looking amazing with comfort. The team at Suit Up Apparel know how testing the day-to-day grind can be, so they have focused their collections around one simple phrase: look great, perform even better. Suit Up are offering new customers 20% off their first order with the code WELCOME20, but don't worry, the Purpose Cycle podcast listeners can get 10% off future orders by using the code PURPOSE at checkout as well. Go on to suitupapparel.co.uk, that's suitupapparel.co.uk to see the fantastic products on offer, and remember to stay sharp and suit up.
Talk about realisation of others as well, and we've touched on that in terms of your home circle and your environment. But what about when you enter the professional game? Because you'll probably encounter people who really look out for you, and those people, like I said, Brad Jarvis, who would stick with you, probably continue to advise you. But what about the people that you met when you first signed? So there'll be obviously groups that, and probably in football teams like cliques, who were, maybe good eggs and who would be very professional and would train properly, and then there'd be maybe a pocket of a couple of sort of bad characters, or maybe characters who were very, very talented and didn't need to necessarily work as hard as maybe you did. What were the sort of people that you met, or who were the sort of people that you met upon signing the deal, and did they have any influence, and how did you sort of pick apart those circles of people who you met?
It was difficult, to be fair, because obviously the time has changed now, because obviously in the game now, young lads are protected quite a lot, and that's fair enough. That's just the way that the world's going at the moment. They want to protect the young kids coming through football teams and stuff like that. But you've got to remember, when I was coming through, obviously the first team lads would make the pro lad, the younger one, clean the boots and do things like that. Yeah. So it was difficult for a young lad to break any sort of cliques or anything like that with the first team boys, because obviously it would, when you see them, it would be literally what it would be like for any Hull City fan. And obviously growing up, you wear a Hull City fan because at the end of the day, these were lads that were playing at Boothry Park and then KC, and you look at them and think, oh, you're a superstar. So it was difficult training with the likes of people like that because you won't really speak to them because you daren't speak to them because you don't want to join their friendship circle because of what they've done in the game. And again, looking back at that, I'll be screaming at a younger version of me because I'd be like, go speak to them, they're not special, they're just a man, another individual just there. So that's a bit of a thing for me where I've looked back in time and thinking, I just wish I was more confident. But from the youth team and obviously from the under-16s, there was a couple of lads I kept with. There was obviously a boy that I went to primary school and secondary, a guy called Gary King. Unbelievable character, was my best friend growing up. Unbelievable. However, couldn't take no. He couldn't take criticism because he was a superstar really, and he should have done so much more in the game. But because he didn't like it and he didn't enjoy getting told no, they ended up releasing him because he couldn't accept literally advice really. So there was a small group of us. There was me, Gary, and another lad called Nathan Hottie. Great story about Nathan Hottie was again from Quadrant Estate, coming up through the ranks, and basically Man United wanted him, and went to Ireland with Man United and ended up signing a deal at Hull City for 2 to 3 years. But again, it didn't work out for him. But that was the sort of people I kept with in that small group. We was all like 3 of us, like 2 of us from East Hull, Nathan from North Hull, and probably the same background where we was all 3 of us were driven. Like we don't take no as an answer really. Like if we want to do something, we'll do it, sort of thing. And there was nothing that was ever going to step in our way because that's just the way we've been brought up.
Yeah. In terms of, you don't have to mention names, but did your circle change once you did get into football full time? So did you have to lose anybody along the way from your home circle, or was there anyone who you sort of just drifted away from? Because obviously when you do sign and your priorities change, it's going to become a career. Did you have to either drift away from anyone, or did anybody turn, I suppose, negative towards you because you were doing something that they maybe wanted to do?
Yeah, I would say so. I had another small group at school as well where I was close with everybody, and for them it was more a bit of a laugh and let's be lads, like lads and all that rubbish. And it was difficult because obviously there was some times where I went at school, I was training and I didn't have to come to school, so there was a group at school where I was close with, but strangely they were quite envious that I was getting all this time off school to concentrate on football and certain things like that. And in that way it was a little bit sad because obviously I'd been with them majority of my life really, of growing up, and looking back on it now, like I would never think about it like how you've put it, but now speaking to you, I'm thinking about that and I'm thinking, well, how selfish was that of them to be like that? And then now I'm still not in contact with them.
Yeah.
However, on the flip side of that, the other friends who I've grown up with, they weren't really into sport and stuff like that. They had a go, and I did lose contact with them. But the difference between them and the ones at school, I've never lost contact with them ones because they've always checked in to see how I am, and they've never been envious or anything like that. If anything, it's gone the other way where I've heard stories, and it's a bit embarrassing sometimes because I look at my football story and I think I've not actually done anything, where other people will be like, you've done this, you've done that. But I'm quite modest in that sense because there's still a lot of things that I feel I've not achieved in life in the footballing side of things. But when my friends, when I've grown up with, and I've heard them talking about me and saying, oh, have you heard what Tom's done, you've heard this and you heard that, I smile about it, but then I think only if they knew, like I've not hit them goals that I've set when I was younger. But it's nice to think that they've always had my back when I thought, oh, I've not really heard from them, I've not talked to them, but I know that they've been speaking about me. And I've only just recently, in the last couple of years, got back in contact with them, and we've all had a drink together and stuff, and we've had a real good laugh. So it was nice to know that they've still got my back, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So upon being released, you mentioned that before, and obviously discovering these things about yourself through the realisation phase. Followers of the Purple Cycle know that I've drawn 2 arrows that go back and fall from each other back to the aspiration phase, because you can often kick back between the two when you have to, realise something and then discover a new journey. So then we're going to kick back to the aspiration phase really quickly, because after you were released from Hull City, did it feel like that was it, the journey was over, and what were the aspirations then? And then in terms of your internal, what your internal thoughts, what did you want to do next? And then obviously I understand in your story as well, there was an external factor that actually came to you a little bit further down the line. So what was the next step for you, essentially, after you were?
Yeah, so there was the dreaded meeting of obviously getting released, which it's one of them. I'll always say to people, if they've got a son or a daughter that's been released from a club or a certain level, I'll speak to them, because I remember vivid of coming out that meeting, and there was an Elton John song, and now this Elton John song, if I hear it, it brings back them memories, and realistically I should be able to get past that. But that is the worst stage of life for any sportsman, being told you are not good enough. And they have the reasons, like Hull said that they didn't have enough budget, they didn't have enough this or that, and for me that's just excuses. Like, I would have rather been told, no, you're not good enough, we don't think you're progressing, but they went down the budget route. Now for me, left that meeting, had a real good, well in fact I think I walked home from KC Stadium. My dad was in the car and I walked home from town to Eastall, and absolutely heartbroken. I think 4 or 5 people stopped me because I was crying, and I just kept on walking. And I literally didn't have a clue what to do. So we got home, spoke to my dad, and he said, listen, you're going to have to go back to college. So I went to St Mary's College, which was great. My friends were still there, and it was all right. But then there was always that little thing inside where I was thinking, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? I have no clue. And then my dad said, well, and Mark Harridge again, what about England schoolboys? So I had to play for Humberside, we won Yorkshire Cups and stuff like that. Then the letter came through and I went to the trials, successful in the trials, went away to Lilleshall, like the 2 lines when you go in your car, like I can't explain to any child that dream that you've had where I was playing out on the street corner pretending to be Alan Shearer and these players, and I'm going down this same road that they've all been down. There's 3 lions waiting at the entrance of this building, and I'm in. And like then I realised that massive despair that I had of not getting that contract and thinking my life's over, and then in like a year and a half's time where I've put the work in and I'm at Lilleshall, England's home, a training ground.
Did that change your relationship with Fairley then? So did you have a good relationship with Fairley before that, or did it take that setback and then obviously a great thing to come out of it in order for you to realise actually Fairley is not such a bad thing? Yeah,
most definitely. It's difficult for me because failure has never been a thing that I've ever looked at. I've never really failed anything. I think, to be honest, if I'm being honest, I don't think any child should fail anything really till about 15, 16. I think that you should live your life to the maximum when you're during school and with your friends, because there's nothing you really should be failing. I know like we got tests and things like that, but I'm talking like the really big things, like at 16-year-old failing at Hull City, I literally thought that was game over. I didn't see anything else. I didn't forecast I wanted to be a police officer or a teacher or anything. It was literally football. So when that failure set in, it took me a good couple of months to get out of the rut. But then I was thinking, well, wait a minute. Everyone goes through this. You've got some professionals that play for pro clubs, and it'll happen this summer after COVID and things like that. A professional footballer will play 380 times for whatever club, and they'll come to the end of the contract and they will struggle to get a club. And that's kind of what happened in the failure side of it. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to use this failure as my fire. Yeah. Because I'm thinking, I'm not having some guy in an office tell me they've not got enough budget to sign me. I'm thinking, who are you? So this is where I changed like my full mindset. And people would say, oh, he's a little bit arrogant, that Tom Nicholson. But it wasn't arrogance. I get fired up to the point where I kind of enjoy it now when someone says, he can't do that. Yeah. Because I'm always one of them, maybe from where I'm from, Eastall, like the back streets of Eastall sort of thing, like, who are you telling that I can't do something? I'll show you. So that's my mindset where it's always been at now. No matter what I'll ever do, there'll be some things where I definitely can't do something, but I'll never show it. I'll never show anybody that I can't do something. I'll always give it 120% of like smashing through that door sort of thing.
Yeah. So it was interesting what you said about trying to sort of shield younger children away from failures, because, and you're talking about the big failures like being released, and just the fact that you didn't see, falling off a bike or losing a football game in school as a failure. It's a much bigger thing for you. You don't actually categorise those small things as failures. They're probably more learning opportunities. So even that language of not even, because I know a lot of, obviously we both work in a school, there could be somebody who gets 8 out of 10 in their spellings and label themselves as a failure because they've not actually got they've got 2 wrong out of 10, but actually I think you're speaking quite positively in the sense that actually you got 8 right, so which is really important. And then when it comes to the bigger things that can dictate your career, can dictate your life, they're more of the bigger failures. And when you get past 16, I suppose that's when a huge amount of importance gets placed on these things. So going into England, and you've sort of visualised putting on a 3 Lions shirt and playing for England. What was that experience like, and did it match the feelings that you dreamt of when you were a bit younger?
Great question. Did it match the feeling? It did. That feeling of when you walk in the changing rooms and you see your name on the back of a shirt and then you put it on, that's amazing. There's nothing better than the world. But then to look down and see them 3 Lions, like, it's just like it makes the back of your hair like stand up and your arms, your hair standing up sort of thing. It's just that feeling, like you can't explain it. There's nothing close to it, to think that you are one of these 18 or 21 boys out of the full country that is in this changing rooms. And yeah, people will say, if they're listening, if there's other footballers listening, like, oh well, it's not proper England, but I disagree with that, because the people that have played for England schoolboys, you're talking Michael Owen, you're talking people like that, like I'm pretty sure their careers were outstanding. But for me, to see my name on the back of the shirt and obviously walk out and play certain games against different people, like for instance, we played one game, we played Best of the World. I mean, like, I'm a lad from East Hull, and I'm standing at Lewishall playing against lads that are from Brazil and Uruguay and Spain, and I'm playing against these lads, and I'm thinking, I have no clue what's going on here, of how I've got to this point in my life, but all I know is I look down, I can see the 3 Lions, and I think, do you know what, I'm so happy that I stuck to coming back from that disappointment at Hull City and just going at it. Yeah, and that probably was like one of the dreams that came to fruition, and it's almost a mini cycle in itself when we said that these cycles can be broken down a little bit earlier on at the beginning of the show. However, was you not playing at Wembley at that point then? You were just playing for your country, so the Wembley thing was still actually there. Was that a good thing? Did that spur you on, or did you think, well, I thought if I was going to play for England, I would have probably played at Wembley, and how did you react to that? Yeah, so with England schoolboys, you played at different stadiums across the country. It was never at Wembley, so you'd play Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and then you go abroad to do like a home nations tournament sort of thing. So the Wembley thing was never going to happen, because I don't know the reason why we didn't play at Wembley. But so that dream was always still there, still the same dream when I was 19, 20, dreaming of walking out at Wembley and thinking, right, how am I going to get this? The only downside to the England schoolboy sort of thing was that I was still playing locally. So I didn't really have a semi-professional team at this point. I didn't have a pro team. So that also, the doubt in my head was thinking, how am I going to get to Wembley when I'm not really attached to a football team? That was the worry.
A huge thank you to Tom Nicholson, who was remarkable in this part 1 of using failure with fuel. Be sure to check out part 2, which is available now on the podcast platform that you are listening on, and see how Tom uses this failure to rise up and accomplish his goals. I'll see you there.
Watch me not stop though.